There's a character in a kid's cartoon who forgave his own nephew after being stabbed in the back by him twice, who forgave himself after failing the most important battle of his entire life, who forgave an entire nation for the death of his son. And here's the strange part. That's not even the most absurd thing. The most absurd thing is you. You who never buried a child, who never lost a war, who was never betrayed by someone you raised with your own hands, and yet you still carry grudges over things that are laughably smaller, an unanswered message, and "I'm sorry" you decided not to accept out of pure stubbornness. Someone else's mistake that you replay in your head for years, as if replaying it were some kind of punishment for the person who made it. A comment someone made at a party 3 years ago that you can still repeat word for word with the exact same anger as day one. That character's name is Iroh, and you're about to find out what he understood about forgiveness, something that, until now, you've refused to understand. Think about how many conversations you've already rehearsed in your head, alone, in the shower, in traffic, right before falling asleep. Conversations that will never actually happen, where you finally say everything you should have said, where the other person finally gets how big their mistake was, where you come out the winner of an argument that only exists inside your own mind. That has a name. It's called stewing. And most of us do it so often we don't even notice anymore. It becomes a habit, becomes automatic, almost a comfortable place to visit whenever there's nothing else to do. Before he became the kind old man who tells bad jokes and pours tea for whoever walks by, Iroh was a general. He was heir to the throne of the Fire Nation. He was the man his own people called the Dragon of the West, a title you don't earn by being kind, but by being feared. He led the longest siege ever recorded in that world, 600 days outside the walls of Ba Sing Se, the most heavily defended city on the planet, a city no one before him had ever come close to breaking. This was not a fragile man. He wasn't born a pacifist. Before anything else, he was a winner, someone trained since childhood to conquer whatever he set out to conquer, raised inside a culture that treated compassion as weakness and victory as the only language that mattered. Hold on to that, because it matters. Iroh's wisdom about forgiveness didn't come from a comfortable place. It wasn't handed down by some monk who never suffered a day in his life, teaching peace from inside an isolated temple. It was forged on top of a loss brutal enough to harden any human being to the bone. And that's exactly why it carries so much weight when he chooses, in spite of it, a different path. On the 600th day of the siege, after almost 2 full years of military campaign, of dead soldiers, of spent resources, of an entire city under siege, Lu Ten, Iroh's only son, the heir he had, the reason that war still felt worth fighting, dies in battle. It wasn't quick. It wasn't painless. It was a loss that arrived after months of anticipation, after Iroh was already convinced that victory and his son were all but guaranteed. Iroh doesn't push forward. He disbands the entire army. He walks away from a siege that was one step from victory after 600 days of collective sacrifice. Soldiers who died for that cause, an entire nation's resources poured into it. He throws all of it away. He goes home, and, according to that world's own records, he cries, openly, for a long time, without hiding it from anyone, without caring what a general crying in public would do to his image. Sit with that image for a second. A general on the verge of taking the most powerful city in the world, a man who would have gone down in history as the conqueror no one else could be, drops everything, the glory, the title, the legacy, because losing his son outweighed any possible victory. He literally had the world in the palm of his hand and decided none of it meant anything without his son in it. Have you ever lost something that big? Probably not. And yet it's very likely you're still carrying grudges over things infinitely smaller than that, as if they carried the same weight. A relationship that ended badly, a business partner who scammed you on some small deal, a relative who skipped your birthday. Real things, things that genuinely hurt, sure, but that you treat with the same level of permanent resentment someone would reserve for the death of a child. After Lu Ten's death, the story records that Iroh's hair turns white, his body grows tired, his eyes grow sadder. That general never goes back to who he was. He becomes a different person, literally a different person, to the point that people who knew him before the war and after the war describe him as two different men. But here's the detail most people miss when they talk about this character. Iroh didn't use that pain as an excuse to shut himself off from the world. He didn't use his grief as a license to be cruel to the people around him, which, let's be honest, would have been the most expected, the most human, the easiest reaction to justify. He did the opposite. He started walking around with a teapot under his arm, telling bad jokes to whoever would listen, taking care of a bitter teenage nephew who could barely look him in the eye. Notice the choice that represents. He had every right to become a bitter man. No one would have questioned it. His pain was legitimate. It was enormous. It was justified. And still, he decided again and again not to let that pain become the standard for how he treated the people around him. You know someone, maybe it's you, who uses an old wound as justification for mistreating the people standing next to them today. I'm like this because someone hurt me. I don't trust anyone anymore because I got betrayed once. Sentences that sound like an explanation, but that in practice are just permission to keep hurting other people, including ones who never did anything wrong to you. Iroh lost his son and every single day chose not to let that close off his own heart. That's not weakness. It's probably the hardest thing there is because holding on to pain is easy. It's automatic. It's the path of least resistance. Choosing not to let it harden you is daily, conscious, repeated work. There's a far more common, far quieter version of that same wrong choice, and it plays out every day in ordinary families. It's the father who was abandoned as a child and decides, without even realizing it, to also keep emotional distance from his own kids because learning to love up close feels too dangerous. It's the person who was cheated on in a relationship and starts sabotaging every new relationship before it even gets serious, just to never risk feeling that again. No one calls it cowardice in the moment. It's usually called learning or being smarter now. But in practice, it's the opposite of what Iroh did. It's letting an old wound write the rules for how you treat new people, people who had no part in what happened before. Zuko arrives already marked, literally, with a scar he's carried since he was 13, given by his own father as punishment for a moment of unintended disrespect. A moment where the boy was only trying to protect soldiers being sacrificed in a cruel military strategy, banished from his own home, forced to hunt down something nearly impossible to find in order to be allowed back. Zuko grows up surrounded by rage, pride, and an obsession with reclaiming an honor he can't even properly explain. And the one who stays by his side, year after year, traveling by ship, sleeping in ports, eating badly, is the uncle who had just lost his own son, a man who had every reason in the world to be too depressed to even get out of bed, and who instead chooses to walk away from a comfortable life in the capital to follow an unbearable teenager on an endless hunt. Notice this. Iroh doesn't choose Zuko because it's easy. It's the opposite of easy. It's years of living alongside someone unstable, angry, someone who treats badly the very person trying to help him. He stays because he understands something almost no one who's been hurt understands. That staying present for someone, even when that person is unbearable, is already a form of forgiveness in motion. It's not a nice speech about moving on. In practice, it's simply not leaving when leaving would be completely justified. How many times have you called it setting a boundary, when really it was just being too tired to forgive? There's a difference between protecting your own mental health and simply giving up on someone the first comfortable chance you get. And most of us never stop to think about which of the two we're actually doing. Throughout the journey, Zuko betrays Iroh more than once. He repeatedly chooses his own obsession with honor over his uncle's well-being. At one point, he even acts in a way that directly harms the man who spent years taking care of him, helping the very people hunting them both, putting his own uncle at direct risk to try to win back his father's favor. And Iroh watches this happen without retaliating, without cutting him off, without turning it into a weapon to use against his nephew later in some future argument as emotional ammunition saved for the right moment to hurt him back. That's not naivety. Naivety would be not noticing what's happening. Iroh notices perfectly, and chooses, even so, not to return the favor. That's a repeated, conscious, difficult choice, made by someone who was fully capable of retaliating and decided it wasn't worth it. And here's the question you've probably been avoiding since the start of this video. How many times have you cut someone off for good over a betrayal far smaller than that? How many times has "I will never forgive this person" become part of your identity, almost a badge of pride, as if it made you stronger, more respectable, tougher, when in reality it just left you more alone, with fewer people around you, with more reasons to distrust any future attempt to get close? There's a bill nobody pays attention to when they cut someone off, one that only shows up years later. It's the tally of how many good people you also lost in the process of protecting yourself from one bad one. How many mutual friends you drifted from by association. How many chances at reconciliation you closed off because you preferred to keep the version of the story where you're purely the victim and the other person is purely the villain. Because that version is simpler, hurts the ego less, and demands no reflection on what you also could have done differently. Iroh never oversimplified Zuko that way. He saw his nephew as someone complex, hurt, capable of making mistakes, and capable of changing at the same time, and it was exactly by holding on to that complexity that he managed to stay close without destroying himself in the process. Later in the story, there's a moment when Iroh is captured, along with the avatars he'd spent the entire journey indirectly protecting, inside an underground cave covered in crystals. Zuko shows up there, and in one of the most emotionally tense scenes in the entire story, he has to decide, right in front of his uncle, between two things: staying with the person who always took care of him, with no guarantee of honor or recognition, or going back to the Fire Nation, to the father who marked him for life, hoping to finally be accepted. Zuko chooses to go back, chooses to betray again, this time even more directly, even more painfully, right in front of his uncle with no disguise. And Iroh, even feeling the weight of yet another rejection, even knowing exactly what that meant for himself, for his safety, for the future of everything he'd been building, doesn't use the moment to give up on his nephew. He's taken prisoner, spends a good stretch of time alone in a cell, with plenty of time to stew over that decision, to convince himself Zuko was a lost cause. And still, when he meets his nephew again later, he remains willing to welcome him back the moment he finally decides to switch sides, without demanding satisfaction first, without requiring a formal apology before reopening the door. A direct question. No dancing around it. Is there someone in your life you've already decided you'll never forgive, even though, deep down, you know that person could still change? And is that decision really protection, or just pride dressed up as principle, a way to never risk getting hurt again, even if it means shutting the door on any chance of reconciliation? It's easy to forgive someone in theory, once the betrayal is already in the past, and you don't feel that much anger anymore. What's hard is what Iroh does, forgiving while the wound is still open, while you can still taste the bitterness of it. Most of us only manage something resembling forgiveness years later, once the pain has already worn itself down with time. And even then, it's not really our own merit. It's just the clock doing the work for us. Iroh chooses this while it's still raw, still fresh, with no guarantee whatsoever that it'll be worth it. Here's the point where most people get stuck trying to apply this lesson to their own lives. They confuse forgiveness with erasing what happened, pretending it didn't hurt, going back to trusting with your eyes closed as if nothing ever happened. And since no one can actually erase a real pain, people conclude that forgiveness is impossible. Or worse, that forgiving means being naive, means putting yourself at risk again. Iroh never does that. He doesn't pretend the betrayal in the cave never happened. He doesn't pretend the pain of losing his son ever went away. Decades later, he's still keeping a portrait of his son, still crying alone on specific dates, still carrying that real pain without hiding it. What he does is different. He decides that this real pain, this legitimate hurt, isn't going to dictate how he treats the person standing in front of him now. He separates two things most people treat as one and the same: feeling the pain, and using the pain as an excuse to shut your heart. Forgiveness, the way Iroh lives it, isn't saying it's fine, it didn't hurt. It's saying, it hurt, and it still hurts sometimes. And even so, I choose not to carry this as a weapon against you for the rest of my life. Can you make that distinction in your own life? Or do you still treat forgiving and pretending it never happened as the same thing? And because of that, never truly forgive, afraid that forgiving means denying your own pain, admitting it didn't hurt you that much. Some people confuse forgiveness with immediately going back to the exact same level of trust as before. That's not it either. After the betrayal in the cave, Iroh doesn't hand Zuko the same automatic access, the same closeness as before. His trust has to be earned back gradually, through actions, through time, through consistent choices in the right direction. That's mature. That's adult. What never changes, not for a single moment, is Iroh's willingness to leave that door open for trust to be earned back, instead of locking it for good and throwing away the key. There's a huge difference between, I'm going to rebuild trust slowly, carefully, and I've decided you will never get another chance with me, no matter what. The first is wisdom. The second, however strong it might look, is usually just an open wound wearing the name of a principle. By the end of the story, Iroh returns to the very same city he once nearly conquered by force, except this time not as an invading general, not with an army behind him, not with any intention of taking anything. He comes back as an ordinary man, alone, opening a small tea shop in some ordinary neighborhood, treating everyone who walks through the door kindly, without demanding any recognition for what he did or didn't do in the past. He never receives a formal apology from the city he besieged for nearly 2 years. He never receives any compensation for the son he lost trying to conquer that very same place. He doesn't even get acknowledgement that the siege and that loss ever happened. He simply keeps living there, pouring tea, playing a board game with whoever wants to sit down, being kind, without waiting for the world to settle the score first, without making his own peace conditional on a satisfaction that may never come. This is the hardest part of the whole story to swallow. Iroh forgives before receiving anything in return. He doesn't wait for an apology to put the weight down. He doesn't wait for the other side to deserve forgiveness first. He puts the weight down because at some point in his life, he understood that continuing to carry it only hurt himself, that the city wasn't losing any sleep over his resentment. But he was. Are you waiting for an apology that may never come before you finally allow yourself to move on? Are you making your own peace conditional on an action from someone who may not even know or care how much pain they caused you? There's a specific trap worth naming here. When you decide you'll only be at peace once the other person acknowledges their mistake, you hand control of your own peace over to someone who's already proven in the past that they don't care about you enough to do that. It's like expecting the person who hurts you to also be the person who heals you. And most of the time, they never will. Not because the world is unfair, but because people rarely see their own mistake at the same size the victim sees it. Iroh understood that early on. If his peace depended on an entire city's acknowledgement, he would have died waiting. He chose instead to build his own peace without needing anyone's permission to do it. Now forget about Iroh for a second and think about you. Think about who you still haven't forgiven. It might be a father who failed you in a way that shaped your entire childhood. It might be a friend who disappeared right when you needed them most, with no explanation, no closure. It might be an ex-partner who treated you badly and never acknowledged it. It might be yourself, over a mistake from years ago that you replay every time something goes wrong in your life, as if that one mistake defined who you are forever, as if you didn't have the right to mess up once and move forward. Iroh lost a son and still remained capable of loving someone else deeply. He was repeatedly betrayed by the person he raised as his own son and stayed with the door open without turning that into permanent distrust. He was rejected by an entire city, by an entire war, and kept pouring tea with a genuine smile. Not forced, not performed. And you, with hurts infinitely smaller by comparison, decided resentment is safer than vulnerability. Decided cutting someone off for good is easier than rebuilding anything. Decided holding pain close, even when it no longer serves any purpose, even when it's only keeping you company while it eats you up from the inside, is more comfortable than simply letting go. It isn't. It only feels that way, because letting go feels dangerous. It feels like giving up some kind of protection. But most of the time, what you call protection is just a prison you built yourself, and now you're complaining about being trapped in it. Think about that family group that hasn't really spoken in years over some argument at a holiday party that almost nobody even remembers the exact details of anymore, just the leftover feeling of hurt. Think about that childhood friend you quietly unfollowed on social media without ever having a real conversation about what happened, just an uncomfortable silence every time their name comes up by chance. Think about how many times you've said, "I'm fine, I've moved on," about something that's still secretly dictating how you react whenever someone similar to that person enters your life. Resentment doesn't announce itself. It shows up disguised as distrust, as distance, as an "I'd rather not get involved." That's really just old fear wearing new clothes. Iroh isn't kind because life was easy on him. He's kind despite life having been brutal, despite having lost almost everything a man in that world was taught to value: title, heir, reputation, his own brother's respect. His forgiveness wasn't born from the absence of pain. It was born in the middle of it, as a choice made over and over, every single day, even when choosing it hurt, even when resentment would have been infinitely easier to pick instead. You don't have to forgive today. You don't have to send that message right now, call that person this week, resolve all of it in one single night just because you watched a video on YouTube. Real forgiveness doesn't work like that, in one instant snap, and it would be dishonest to promise you it does. But maybe you can start by asking yourself, honestly, without lying to yourself, who you're still carrying a weight for that you should have set down a long time ago. Not for them, not because they deserve it, for you. Because as long as you hold on to that pain as part of your identity, the one still paying the price every single day isn't the person who hurt you. It's you. Worth repeating one thing before we close, because it's easy to hear all of this and walk away thinking forgiveness means pretending everything's fine, going back to trusting blindly, letting the same person hurt you the same way all over again. That's not it. Iroh stayed with his eyes wide open around Zuko. He saw every wrong choice, every relapse, and adjusted how close he let him get depending on the moment without ever pretending he didn't notice. Forgiveness isn't foolishness. It's not deleting the history. It's simply refusing to carry that as a permanent weight on your own back, while still staying smart enough to protect yourself when you need to. And if, watching this right now, a specific name just came to mind, a name you avoided thinking about for most of this video because it's uncomfortable, that might be exactly the information you needed. Not to fix it right now, not to send any message the second this video ends. Just to stop pretending, at least to yourself, that this weight doesn't exist. Recognizing that it's there is already the first step most people never take.